So GenesysGo, we're a blockchain infrastructure project, a DePIN project. We're building the platform called Shadow Drive, which is a decentralized storage platform that is basically designed to keep up with, centralized, traditional Web 2 cloud platforms in terms of speed, stability, security, and easy use.
GM, welcome to another episode of the Solfate podcast, where we talk with builders and founders in the Solana ecosystem. And today we had Frank from GenesysGo and Shadow Drive.
This is a big
awesome conversation. I'm so excited to use Shadow Drive V2. It sounds really cool.
Yes, I'm super pumped. I feel like if anyone can deliver on the promise of like decentralized storage that competes with basically the speed and performance of traditional storage, it's these guys. And I'm pumped.
Yeah, I'm super excited. We talked about like the why of like, yeah, we're here at blockchain, we're blockchain people, but we talked about the why of why decentralized storage and like what decentralized actually means and like how it works. And we talked a lot about the V2 of Shadow Drive, and like, it's so fucking cool. Like, it's going to be run on completely mobile networks. Like, your phone is going to be a node, and you just so cool.
I wanted to say this in the episode and it didn't come up. We got derailed, but I was like, it's like an episode of Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've watched Silicon Valley, but this is literally a plot in Silicon Valley where they like compressing data on a decentralized network on people's mobile devices. It's
middle out technique, middle out compression.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, Frank, you are living this show. What is happening? I love it though. Super excited. Let's get into the show. But before that, I just want to do a quick shout out to Phantom. We love working with Phantom. They're the preferred, wallet of the Solfate ecosystem. Also, I just want to give a quick plug for my dev shop. If you need any engineering work done, our team is here, ready and willing to help. We're very familiar with Solana. We do a bunch of stuff on Solana.
Verified.
But with that, let's get into the show.
Let's go. Nothing in this podcast is or should be considered financial advice. Any opinions and thoughts expressed are solely those of the individual. They do not represent the opinions of any entity. Enjoy.
I would love to get some background on how GenesysGo got founded, right? And I guess for the listeners, maybe we start with like the 15, 20 second, what is GenesysGo? And then we can do some sort of background, how it came to be,
Yeah. So GenesysGo, we're a blockchain infrastructure project, a DePIN project. We're building the platform called Shadow Drive, which is a decentralized storage platform that is basically designed to keep up with, centralized, traditional Web 2 cloud platforms in terms of speed, stability, security, and easy use. We got our start, back in the very first part of 2021. We launched a validator, my partner and I. We've known each other for 10 plus years, and we found out about Solana, got super excited about the tech, thought proof of history was really, really cool. Deployed a validator. We attracted, a strong amount of stake kind of right out the gate, through like social media, and then integrating with, different Discord servers of different, projects that were out there. And very quickly, then we moved into building and providing RPC network support and RPC server access for the broader community. Basically, we grew our network. Became the largest provider, tied for the largest provider of RPC services on Solana. This is summer to fall of 2021. We're really fortunate to capture a lot of like the new developers that were being onboarded. And then from there, we kind of used that to set our sights on the thing that we had been, kind of targeting all along, which is data storage on Solana. One of the very first things that we kind of saw was, running a validator. And this is why I think, it's so important to integrate with new tech kind of, at a foundational level. One of the things that we saw with the running a validator was like, the way that, storing the ledger history, like what a stress that is for the network, the way that it ends up, each validator fills up their hard drive with ledger history and then starts to overwrite it. And, that ledger history is ultimately sent somewhere else. And, that to us was like a really huge opportunity, for us to make a positive impact on the ecosystem. And so, effectively we set out to build Solana's hard drive and strap it to the Solana network. And that's what Shadow Drive ultimately is. And, we've launched the platform, kind of our, what we call our, version 1.5 platform. We launched that July of 22. And immediately began working and building on the V2 platform, which is kind of the final form of Shadow Drive that's is maximum decentralization, maximum permissionlessness, maximum trustlessness. And in the meantime, the V1.5 platform has grown to on average about 130,000 daily active users. It's actually
Wow,
been
that's
super cool to
nice.
watch. Whether those users are uploading data or accessing data that's been, that's stored on the network. It was a really, really huge, piece of validation for us that okay, there's real demand for what it is that we're building. And that's, kind of the big thing about Web3, right? If you build something that is just easy for people to use, they'll actively want to participate. That just proved so much of that for us. And so yeah, it's been really, really exciting, really cool journey. And we're looking forward to, deploying V2, the tail end of this year.
That's so
That's
cool.
awesome.
I always love to hear origin stories because it's just like, where did someone have the idea? When, how did they sort of direct their energy toward the end goal and ultimately achieve it, right? I'm sure you guys went through a bunch of ups and downs, learned a bunch along the way. Would love to dig into some of that too during this conversation.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I think one of the things that I think is important for listeners to understand is maybe what is the point, right? Is like, what is the point of decentralized storage over AWS storage, for example, or Google Cloud, that sort of thing, right? Obviously, I think we here are all on the same page about why this matters.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a worthwhile conversation for listeners because maybe not everyone is bought in yet and understands the power of decentralized storage.
Yeah. So I completely agree with everything that you just said. I don't even think, the majority of Web3 participants truly realize and have truly internalized what value decentralized networks actually bring. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of a lot of, for lack of a better term, trendy buzzwords, if you will, right? Own your own data, the decentralization of power and control and everything like that. But at the end of the day, the fact that AWS or Google Cloud, right? The fact that, or, iCloud, any centralized storage provider, the fact that it's a centralized service and that, my data isn't quote my own, that hasn't affected me at all. In my just day-to-day normal life, right? It's things that when I think about them, philosophically, I think about the ideology, of course I'm not okay with that. But, when I open up my phone and I need to find a picture, or if I, pull up Google Drive because I need to find files, they're there. And so, when we started kind of down this road of building a decentralized storage platform, that was one of the first things that we thought about was okay, why? Who cares really? It was a question we kept asking ourselves. I guess we worked through this is why should anybody care? Especially about something that, again, it's super easy to access, in the Web2 world. But then when you kind of go to Web3 decentralized storage platforms, pre-Shadow Drive, there's a lot of barriers to entry. There's, performance, may or may not, be something that you're giving up kind of in the name of decentralization. And, I think the biggest thing that, people kind of forget, if you will, is that when the Bitcoin network was first launched, it was meant to be a, permissionless peer-to-peer payment network, right? The real value of that was that people could transact, not just instantly, not without, or not, removing barriers and things like that, but they could do it incredibly cheap because it was, the whole network is running on people's computers, in their homes. It's a bunch of, what often has a bunch of Raspberry Pi machines somebody had, like hooked up together and plugged in somewhere. And, of course, that's grown and it's scaled into more, a much more like commercial business. But at the end of the day, you can send a network transaction, on Bitcoin, Solana, and send a payment to your friend for, incredibly cheap and do it in a much easier way. Decentralized networks can do everything centralized networks do at a fraction of the cost. And it's that cost savings that I think is one of the most overlooked things, by Web3 participants who are, kind of, they're bought into Web3, for those ideological reasons, which, is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like all movements start from, philosophy and ideology, right? That's where things gather steam and they move into the mainstream. But I think in order for us to, as like decentralized networks, onboard kind of the next wave, right? Like the wave of Web2 power users, Web2 businesses, that, aren't using blockchain at all because of the barriers to entry, because of stability questions, security questions, blah, blah, blah. For them, one of the biggest things is going to be like, what does this do for our business that it doesn't already do? Well, we can provide storage at a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the bandwidth cost that you're paying now. And we can, check all of the kind of like ticket to play boxes, that are just, the baseline has to be there. And again, we could do it at a fraction of the cost. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect, is the decentralization of those revenues that, big tech cloud providers, big bank financial providers, they kind of keep to themselves, right? Like billions of dollars in revenues. You can think about the amount of money that payment platforms make, right? Like PayPal's revenues, right? They're insane. They're doing very, very well for themselves. Decentralized networks, hypothetically, philosophically, they should be taking those revenues that are being generated and they should be, passed directly to, the operators of the network, right? Whether it's in a token or whether it's, direct pass through like Shadow Drive, it's that element of being able to say like, we've disrupted an entire industry. We disrupted the financials of an entire industry, both on the cost side and the revenue side, and given that to the people and given those benefits to everyone. That's I think is like the true, real value that decentralized networks bring. And I think it's what we're going to see kind of becoming center stage over the next, 2-3 years.
I love that. I'm very familiar with the cost savings with payments, right? Mm-hmm. I've never really thought of decentralized storage as being a cost saving element, relative to traditional Web2 storage. I'm curious. Is there any specifics you happen to have off the top of your head in terms of like where that cost savings is coming from? Because in my mind, I think decentralized storage, I think like more redundancy and it's stored across multiple places. And so maybe it's even a little bit more expensive, but worth the cost. So hearing you say like, hey, it's actually a fraction of the cost is super intriguing to me.
Yeah. So the biggest and kind of most overlooked cost that like platforms, developers, power users, businesses, that they experience is it's actually not storage. Storage is super cheap. It's bandwidth. When a platform takes off, right? We've seen this.
Bills go up real quick.
Yes, they do. 100% they do. Yes. And, decentralized networks, they can do that at a fraction of the cost because you're using people's they're using people's home networks, or, in the case of Shadow Drive, V2, using mobile networks, right? You're using the ability of the network to kind of come together and act as a single organism while, processing many, many parts of the same thing all at the same time and feeding those parts, back to the, the end user, reassembling them and all of that. you're able to make that a much more like bandwidth efficient activity because it's kind of the many hands make light work, saying, right? And so that like bandwidth costs, we saw this. We were an RPC provider. That was one of the big things for us. You saw it when we were running a validator. Validators push tons of data back and forth, right? And yeah, those bandwidth costs add up super fast. We've seen it on I've seen it, on Twitter, various platforms. Tensor is a big one for a while. They're talking about like their bandwidth costs. They add up super quick. So yeah, storage super cheap, but cloud platforms, they don't make their money on storage. Like storage platforms don't make their money on storage. They make it on bandwidth costs. And that's where all of these different benefits, to your point, right? Like redundancy, being, essentially failure proof and things like that. All of those different benefits, like they still exist, right? And you're able to be like, okay, I'm gonna use decentralized storage for the permissionlessness of it, the censorship resistance of it, or for the redundancy of it. And now on top of that, we can add the additional benefit of it's more cost effective.
Yeah, bandwidth costs add up really quick, pretty much anywhere. Like that's how AWS makes most of their money, and probably like all the other big cloud providers. So you've now talked about a lot of the why and some of the high levels of the how, like separating like the many hands make light work sort of idea. Can you talk more about like some of the more specific details of like how Shadow Drive actually works and how it accomplishes those things, and like what's the difference between the current V1.5 of the platform and the V2? Can you talk about like some of those details to like give, because like our audience is more technical, a lot of developers at across the ecosystem, and like I would love to nerd out about like how does Shadow Drive actually work?
Yeah. So I'll nerd out with you kind of to a certain extent, and then I definitely direct to like the docs for like going much more like deeper.
Sure, yeah.
So kind of like in a broad sense, right? So let's start with like V1.5 versus V2, right? Kind of the vast majority of decentralized storage platforms that are seeing like any use, they basically took blockchain and it kind of turned into like a square peg round hole situation in that blockchain, as we just said, right? Like with like Bitcoin, it's it's a peer-to-peer financial transaction network, right? Peer-to-peer payment network. Over the years, that's been adapted and kind of massaged into doing like different things that it's not necessarily like super great at doing, but it can kind of do. One of those things, being like the store, data storage. Like if you look at like Arweave, for instance, right? They take and use a very, it's blockchain that is, taking the data, putting it on their network, building it in the blocks, blah, blah. But it's it's built on that foundation of payment networks. So, and that's kind of where, what Shadow Drive V1.5 was originally, right? It was, let's take the Solana network, kind of use that as our, our wrapper around like the storage platform itself. And build off of there, right? So that way you're basically using, very similar like how Filecoin does it, right? You're using the blockchain not only as like, storage marketplace, in the case of Filecoin, but you're using it as your like, payment layer, verification layer, identity management layer, blah, blah, blah. So like the underlying storage network can't do anything without permissions from like the blockchain. And that's all well and good, right? But that's not necessarily going to achieve like traditional cloud platform experience of being like super fast, easy to use, stable. So with V1 or V2, we basically said like, okay, blockchains are great. We love blockchains, obviously. What else is out there? There's this whole wide world of decentralized ledger tech that's being in the blockchain world. We don't spend a ton of time like talking about, looking at, and things like that because, for kind of to a certain extent, or for lack of a better way to put it, blockchain won, if you will, right? Like Bitcoin became the most successful blockchain network, and blockchain became the thing that everybody talked about, everybody focused on. But there's a whole other world of zero trust technology out there, basically. Hash graphs are a great example. Blockchains are, they fall under that umbrella. There's DAGs, Merkle trees, a whole bunch of like different things that technically fall under that umbrella of like zero trust, decentralized ledger tech. And so, what Shadow Drive, what V2 did, or what we did for V2 was we basically stepped back and said, okay, what are all like the best parts of these different pieces of tech? Like, how do they all work? What's the best pieces of them? And how do we take the best parts of them, kind of put them together in a chimera of sorts? So that way they leave the weaknesses behind. And so Shadow Drive, Shadow Drive V2, we basically built, a completely brand new kind of consensus mechanism that is specifically designed to handle data, manage data, orchestrate cloud resources. It does that by building events into a graph, and then basically building blocks out of that graph. It does it by, the network in and of itself, using voting to do things like manage the erasure coding of the network, manage, where the redundancies for data go in the network. And then we actually just recently finished a redesign of a redesign, if you will. Like we built basically our own like custom meta tag, like metadata algorithm to basically kind of make up for some of the limitations that your traditional like Solomon Reed erasure coding scheme has when it comes to scale. So we, redid that. We created our own version of that, kind of custom designed for our needs and solved that scaling problem. Then we recently took that down to, bare bolts and rebuilt it again and made it even more efficient. And so, basically, everything from the way that the network gossips together, the reworking that we did, pulling a lot of parts out of like Quick, the reworking we did with the gossip network, and how the network builds all of that into blocks and into the graph and manages events, is all built specifically around data itself. And that's one of the things where like, we don't have to necessarily worry about, block size, for instance. Like Shadow Drive V2 can build, our blocks of arbitrary sizes. It does it using a leader list, structure. And it's able to do that because basically we approached it from first principles of like data being everything, as opposed to kind of having to build a data management network that's kind of built on the first principles of, blockchain in and of itself, right? Like, so hopefully it kind of makes a little bit of sense. But yeah, that's it's a lot of different pieces from a lot of different pieces of tech that we rebuilt and fused together to be able to build a cloud platform that actually can run, in a decentralized way, specifically on mobile phones. And that's the kind of the most recent thing we've unveiled, is that all of this takes place on mobile phones and exclusively mobile phones. And that's
exclusively.
Exclusively.
I did not realize that.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah, it's we built V2's consensus engine. We built it from the get-go to be incredibly resource efficient. And to basically try to we pushed as much of the work out into the network and, kind of taught the network how to act all as one organism. And that allowed us a lot of like free space when it comes to like resource management, and pushing it all to mobile devices then allows us to like have some really cool points with scaling where, eventually, if we, see massive success with V2 and everybody's downloaded Shadow Drive app and running it on their phones, in places where there are, like let's like really, really dense places, like let's say, and I'm making this up here, like 2 million people in, Manhattan that are all running the Shadow Drive app. Then you can get to some really cool stuff where you can take Shadow Drive completely off like your traditional internet network and start communicating via Bluetooth and things like that. And basically take each phone and turn it into
Bluetooth
a relay network.
Super low bandwidth though.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of stuff that's like we actually got that to work. before we went and kind of unveiled all this at Solana Crossroads in Istanbul. And it was super cool. Obviously, it's challenges that come along with that. But it's one of those where that's a scale thing. There's a point where the network's ability, like it's the network's ability to process things, it runs linearly until it then, starts running exponentially just based on number of devices.
That's really cool that it's able to run completely. So like logistically then, from like the user perspective, it's as simple as install the Shadow Drive app, and then does then the app kind of function at least at a high level, similar to like how IPFS works, where you have like individual devices or pinning files to the network declaring, hey, I have files 1, 2, and 3. Bob down the street or across the world has files 5, 6, 7. And then like when you want to download something off of the Shadow Drive network, it just like goes out to those individual devices, probably tries to figure out, someone's device that's closer to you, network latency, all that kind of goodness. Is that like the gist of how it like the mobile app works, and like these files being stored on these mobile phones?
So yeah, it's similar. It's a little more active than that though. The network is always reevaluating and rebalancing and kind of reproportioning where data's at. So we built the network to be a lot more self-aware, for lack of a better term. Devices report out in kind of much more of a cohesive way. So it's less like you talk about like pinning, you pin data, to a certain location, a certain device. It's a little more static in that, in that way, right? The network that we build is much more, it's just much more fluid. And that fluidity also allows for things to kind of adapt, like the network to adapt and adapt over time. So kind of to your example, right? Like if there's some files that are, primarily like they're being like accessed a lot, right? But they're being accessed primarily from, a specific like location. The network will start to it doesn't just rebalance data in the sense of redundancy. It starts to rebalance the data in the sense of activity as well. And so, you'll start then to the network will basically start to prioritize devices that are consistently closer to that location for having that data, as opposed to it kind of going out and looking and being like, okay, this is the closest location. And so this is just kind of the route that we have.
That's super cool. I need this app. I need to.
Yes. Yeah. I was out of that.
Dope.
Well, I feel like one of the biggest components of blockchain technology in general, or maybe just decentralization in general, is incentives, right? Is like, how do you incentivize this network to run? So I am very curious, what's the incentive for people to download this app?
Yep.
Are there tokenomics associated with it? Is it simply you have to have this app in order to use Shadow Drive as an end user? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah. So the premise behind Shadow Drive, kind of as I said earlier, right? We talked about Shadow Drive, the tech, and how it's able to provide storage, and bandwidth at a much cheaper, cost-effective rate, right? On the operator side, that's where we get into that second point that I touched on earlier when I was talking about the two kind of underappreciated things that decentralized networks are capable of, and that's the decentralization of revenues. So, the Shadow Drive, the Shadow Drive app, when you download the app, you connect your phone, you say, yep, I'm a shadow operator, I'm providing storage to the network, serving requests, storing data. Basically what you're saying is, basically what's happening is your contributions to the network are earning you, a proportionate amount of the network's overall revenues. And that's a direct pass through. So kind of one of our big, ideological thought processes is you look at the amount, the hundreds of billions of dollars that big tech cloud companies, bring in every single year, right? Even just capturing 0.01% of that is tens of millions of dollars, every quarter. And our whole thought process with it, goal, thought process, whatever, is, right now with decentralized storage platforms and, candidly with a lot of decentralized networks, there's there's like there's the public network, but then there's the private, blockchain as a service networks that, like that these ecosystems, these platforms, they spin up and, they sell on the back end, right? Um, it's almost every platform has something like that. Every ecosystem has something like that where, you see it where they just sign some big contract with some, well-known Web2 company, right? And everybody gets excited. By and large, that's not happening on the public network. That's happening on, a private network, a federated network that they, that platform's, foundation runs and operates, and, they're being paid a direct amount, to the foundation. So our goal is to say, like, no, everything runs on a public network, but then those funds, that revenue, those user fees aren't passing through, a centralized entity, us, to get to the user. It's being passed through directly to the user. So ultimately we end up being just another operator on the network, as opposed to, a centralized entity that is gathering those profits on our own. Because, as I say, that's the benefit that blockchain, decentralized technology, gives, right? Is that you should be like, decentralizing like finance. I mean, that was Bitcoin's big thing, right? Like, if you read the white paper, it's actually like Satoshi being really, really mad at banks and really angered at banks, because of, like their greed and, they're constantly like chasing, higher and higher and higher earnings, led to the 2008 financial crisis. And he basically got mad and, wrote a rage letter at the banks and said, screw you, we're going to go do our own thing. And that was, it was brilliant. And it shows like what blockchain and what decentralized networks are capable of doing. We looked at that and said, okay, if Bitcoin does that for finance, we want Shadow Drive to do that for cloud technology. And so, we wrote a blog post a while ago. It kind of outlines, like the flow of the tokenomics within the ecosystem of Shadow Drive, but ultimately, like the real value of the platform, the real monetary value of the platform, comes from that direct pass through of user fees, and that is, something that doesn't just capture user fees that are taking place like on blockchain. This captures user fees that are taking place, if a user pays with a credit card, right? If a user pays with wire transfer, so on and so forth. Those things, we don't just want it to be like, we are only attracting on-chain transactions because, kind of like, if you think about all blockchain, like Solana versus Ethereum, you think of them as, Visa versus MasterCard. You don't see AWS sitting there and going, well, we only use Visa, right? They'll accept payment, however, because that's the biggest, like you want to make sure you are able to take payment from as many people as possible. And so, in Web3, there's kind of this penchant right now for being like, we accept payments or users from multiple chains, right? We went multi-chain. Well, Shadow Drive V2 isn't just meant to go multi-chain. It's meant to be able to take payments, from TradFi as well. Because we want, the whole point of kind of this next wave of Web3 is onboarding all the users, the hundreds of millions of people that aren't exposed to Web3 at all, because, there's no point for them. And then the few that get a little curious, there's just those barriers to entry. Like, our goal is to remove all of that.
So does V2 stand entirely alone? Like, it doesn't rely on any other chain. It's its own system entirely. So whereas,
Yep.
You mentioned before V1.5 using Solana, for example, for identity, for payment, for all these things, in addition to also data storage. Now this is an entirely separate network.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's why we say, kind of use the analogy of like, bolting a hard drive onto Solana, right? Don't get me wrong. We are like, but we were born in Solana. We grew up in Solana. I far and away think Solana has like the best, most exciting ecosystem of any chain. I've long said like Solana's tech is awesome. Their ability though to make people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves has been just phenomenal.
It's been incredible.
It's been incredible. Oh yeah, God, they're like, we even had, we even jokingly at one point, kind of when we were initially doing our building, we were like, okay, is this like a layer one or something? And then we were like, Well, if it is, then that puts us like, in direct competition with like Solana's community and the, just their ability to just get people fired up. And we're like, no, we don't want to be a part. We don't want to do that. Because they're amazing at it. Right. And so, like for us, it's like Solana's our home. The Solana ecosystem's our home. That's, where, that's the only place that we want to be. We look at all other chains and everything as, just their payment mechanisms. But to your question, like V2 is running, its own consensus engine. It is its own network. It could be spun off as its own L1. Pretty easily. And part of that is, again, it's by design, right? Like we want to make sure that the network is monitoring, users, it's monitoring identities, storage addresses, and it's rebalancing appropriately. But what we didn't want to do was basically try to be like, let's try to make the Solana network do things that, it's not designed to do.
Yeah.
Let's be a complement to it, right? Let's supplement its already phenomenal abilities to do the things that it's great at, and let it do the things that it's great at. That's why, like the shadow token, right? Used for, securing an operator's place in the network. It's what secures their identity kind of within the network, where their identity is generated from. That's why it's on the Solana network, as opposed to like, okay, you have to, you come into our network, you have to mint your own, token and blah, blah. Because that's what Solana is great at. It's great at, transactions between peers. It's great at, identity management, wallet management, keeping state, that type of thing. And so, Solana is, in a lot of ways, it's the Solana network is keeping the state of, the operators in the network.
Got it.
It's also,
and that will continue in V2 as well.
Yes.
Okay.
It's also allows us to, accept payments, or it allows us not accept, sorry. It allows operators to accept payments. It allows payments to flow through to operators. So all payment and everything, like all that takes place on the Solana network. And a lot of that, is also like, that's how, like by leveraging like Solana, that's how we can do things like, eventually accept credit card payments and, fiat payments and things like that. Because the Solana network's already built to take that, and through its various like partner platforms, convert it, into tokenized assets.
Got it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a very common like idea that Noah Prince from the Helium Foundation has expressed several times, when, as he lovingly likes to say, he turduckened one blockchain into another.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the idea of like Helium as a separate network, like can't benefit from all of the benefits of an L1 that has all this other, functionality and activity. And that sounds like you basically Shadow Drive is trying to do the exact same thing. Like, while yes, you could operate as your own independent network that like, interacts with other networks as desired, you get way more benefit in the ecosystem, and the users and the operators get way more benefit from having effectively Solana as like the base layer of it, and you're just bolting on the hard drive to Solana. It makes a lot of sense.
It is interesting though, because it's not like an L2, right? Like you're not settling data onto Solana. You're leveraging Solana as almost like a separate module to do XYZ, and then your core focus is a separate network that does ABC.
Right. Yep. That's it. Yeah. That's exactly right. And that, kind of to Nick's point, like, like Helium, I think, is such a great example of that. Because it allows them to, it basically allows both sides, to maximize like their strengths, which, is such a core theme of like the construction of V2's consensus setup is, like let everything maximize its strengths. Don't try to force it to do things that, that it's not good at. And in that way, everything comes together. It becomes like, something that's like greater than the sum of its parts. A lot of what we designed V2 to do is to kind of, to your point, like take a lot of that onus for, settling data like off of Solana, let it focus on doing what it's great at. And then, act as this complementary thing that enhances Solana's abilities, without taking away from anything.
Yeah, that's really cool. We're starting to get close to time here, and one of the questions I wanted to definitely ask you, because I've seen this this point brought up several times within the ecosystem of like censorship. People, when they hear decentralized storage, they think of the ability to upload anything you want to it and it stays forever, permanent or not permanent, depending on whatever particular storage solution. How does Shadow Drive handle censorship? And like, there's in my mind, like there's two distinctions in like censoring content. There's like content that like a government might think is like illegal based off of whatever jurisdiction. That's going to be, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and like depending on where you are in the world, like a whole bunch of caveats there.
Right.
And it's like, could a government say, hey, we don't approve this content of, like we're all Americans, we're all in the US, like First Amendment rights, the ability, freedom of speech. Other people around the world don't have that ability. So that is like censorship that I don't think is okay. But then there's like things that should be, I think, like morally should be censored, like you just like, adult content of like, children kind of stuff, like morally wrong, and that should never be allowed anywhere. How does Shadow Drive and like the operators get a say in any of that? Like, because they're using, your phone, like maybe as an operator, maybe there's certain types of content that you don't want on your personal device. And like, how does that work within the Shadow Drive ecosystem?
Yeah. So for kind of the first thing, right? And I think you hit on it. When people hear censorship resistance, they automatically think it, I have this just carte blanche to say, post, upload, like whatever I want, regardless of, whether it's, illegal, immoral, just flat out wrong. Like, I'm sorry, there is no world in which you'll ever be able to convince me that protecting somebody's ability to, upload like literally anything is also kind of like, it's like, well, having illicit material that takes advantage of minors is just kind of a thing that you have to deal with. Like, that is not ever going to be a network I want to be a part of. I'm sorry. So take that, right? Then there's like censorship. So there's what censorship resistance really means. Because, when you hear censorship resistance, it's being referred to on a network level. And that network level, right, is saying that like, okay, if there's, if half the network is voting up one particular way, we're not going to, the network it's impossible for, any one entity to make a decision that says like, well, the network wants to vote this way, but we're not going to count these votes, right? Or we're not going to count, like this data. Censorship resistance isn't about, carte blanche doing whatever you want. It's about not like one centralized entity not being able to make that decision for you, and instead the network consensus makes that decision, right? And so, kind of to your point, right? Like, if we're three network operators and all three of us say like illicit material taking advantage of minors we're not going to let that be uploaded to the network, and we reach consensus on that because we're a decentralized distributed network, then the network has spoken, right? As opposed to, let's say, like me being the only one saying that, me saying, I don't know what your guys' opinions are, but it doesn't matter because I'm the one saying it, right? So there's kind of like that definitional aspect that I think, gets a little bit lost sometimes. And then there's kind of the other thing of like, whether people like it or not, we do live in the real world. There are certain laws in place, certain regulations in place that just have to be followed, right? Like think about, European data privacy laws, right? Things like that, right? So all of those things, the network basically takes in and says, okay, we vote on, if this data needs to get removed, somebody wants to delete their data, right? The network votes and says, okay, we have to delete that data because, it's in a region in which, data has to be deleted, blah, blah. Like the network basically says, we're going to follow the law. I guess technically speaking, right, the network, super majority of the network could vote not to follow the law, and, the network would listen, right? Because that's kind of the point of it. But that would also be the network's independent operators acting against their own self-interest, which kind of was, the whole point of like Bitcoin, right? Is like, in order for Bitcoin to fail, you have to convince the majority of people to act against their own interests, because the reality is, right? Like if you have an operating, a network of 1 million operators, and, each one of those operators is earning, $300, $400, $500 a month in revenue, they're not going to vote, to potentially hamstring or kill that revenue, like just because. And so the way, like I said, the way V2's network is designed is it's all about the network consensus deciding those things. And so, it's like when you do uploads, you do uploads through anything. Doesn't matter what platform it is, it's like the DNS layer is still the DNS layer. Like there's still scans in place, like regardless of like, what platform you're using that do things like, detect, illicit material, taking advantage of minors. Those things are already blocked before they even get to the network. In a decentralized like DNS scenario, the network would have to vote and basically say like, okay, we all agree we're going to follow, what are called CSAM policies, right? And we're going to, as a network, all reach a consensus that we're going to scan and make sure that, and basically protect, minors from being taken advantage of, through the spread of illicit material. And I, that's something where like I have like literally zero doubt in my mind that, out of 1 million operators, the vast majority of them would say, yes, we want to protect children. Or, yes, we want to follow European privacy laws. So yeah, all of that, like I say, it's, people tend to miss a little bit, like at what layer censorship resistance is, like where it resides and what it actually means. And the Shadow Drive, like V2 network, it's very much censorship resistant because it's, all of that's decided by the network, reaching agreement.
That's a really good call out about decentralization in general, right? It's
True.
It's not about it's not about anything is fair game. It's about anything the majority of the network says is fair game is fair game.
Right.
Right. And
Consensus.
and the yeah and the entire point of the consensus algorithm is the consensus algorithm coupled with sort of the incentive structure of the network is designed to set up this system that we hope is the best possible scenario for maybe not everyone, but like mostly everyone, right?
Right.
It's almost as close as I think about it often as like as close as you can get to direct democracy, right? Where it's just like that's not a direct democracy is not feasible in modern times, just because there's so many people and so many issues at any given point in time. And so this is sort of like pulling away specific issues and getting down to just like, cool, we're talking data flow between nodes in a network and voting on that data being valid or not, right? Whatever data you want to put in there, great, we'll vote on it and decide if it ends up being valid or not.
That's it. Yeah, 100%.
Whether it's data or whether it's payments or it all sort of ends up being the same conceptually. So
right, you see it on payment networks all the time, right? Like when they say like certain wallets get identified as like these are terrorist groups or whatever, right? Like you see wallets get blacklisted by networks on Ethereum quite often, right? On USDT, you see on their through their protocol, like. So yeah, it's one of those things where the network looks at it and says like, okay, what's the pros and cons? We just got basically we just got an order saying like you need to blacklist these wallets. Some government entity told us, and then the network says like, okay, are we going to listen or not? And to your point, at the end of the day, so long as the network is reaching a consensus about that, yeah, nobody's ever going to be happy. Like not everybody is always ever going to be happy. There's going to be that little pocket that's like, no, I don't think we should do it. And the network's going to say like, okay, cool. Well, we appreciate that, but there's bigger things at play here. And that's kind of, like that's the beauty of consensus is that like everybody gets the opportunity to speak or everybody gets the opportunity to participate, whether or not like the thing is like with consensus and permissionless networks, there's no guarantee you're going to love the outcome every time. The guarantee is that you're going to be able to participate in helping to try to direct that outcome.
Yeah. I love that.
There's no single player that's in charge.
Thank you. That's good.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Frank. This has been such a great conversation.
Awesome.
I feel like I'm I learned so much about Shadow Drive V2 that I didn't know before, even though I thought I was paying attention. So that's good. I'm thrilled to learn. Also, I feel like I'm just on level 1, and I need to go dig in further. So I'll definitely do a little bit more reading and learning on my own. I have like at least 6 more questions just bubbling in my brain that I want to talk about. So we might have to get on another call sometime to go over some of them, but I'll do the work on my own first and do some reading, and we'll maybe share some links of stuff that we read in the show notes for people. Are there any last minute thoughts you want to give to our audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think so. Kind of to your point, like we wrote a few much more in-depth articles that are directed more at like a much more technical audience, comparing Shadow Drive V2 to like Filecoin. It's kind of this little versus series that we did. We compared against Tendermint, which is a very popular chain that a lot of storage platforms kind of like bolt onto and kind of just try to finagle to make it do what they want it to do. So like for like you said, since the audience is a lot of developers, a lot more technical people, I think they'll really enjoy those articles because they were written specifically to be like a much more in-depth look. But I think overall, like the platform that we're building, it's meant for developers. It's meant to to be a platforms. So that way, like it's kind of one of those, if you build it, they will come, right? Like I think blockchains, it's such a cool point right now. And Solana's done such a good job of focusing on the developer community in order to attract users that, we're actively trying to replicate that for V2. And so we're going to be really excited to hear like feedback from the developer community once it goes live.
Amazing.
Love it.
Cool.
Well, thanks so much, man. We'll have to do this again sometime. Maybe just before V2 launches, we can chat a little bit about how that's going. But
love that.
Yeah, to the listeners, thanks for being here, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye-bye.